Hi, folks. Thanks for joining in for today's ASABE webinar. This webinar is about transforming your engineering innovation into a product through SBIR, which is like Small Business Institute Research funding program through NIFA, and similar program does exist with NSF as well. Anyway, so with the support from ASABE, we wanted to have this 2-hour webinar. The scope is again is to bring more information to you and some success stories, so that you can look at the program and think of converting your innovation into a product through some of this external funding, right? So besides me, I'm Khot, by the way, with Washington State University. Abdul Momin from University of Arkansas at Bluff. He will be moderating this webinar. And quickly, we have 4 panelists, speakers on this. We are going to spend 2 hours. The first talk is from USDA NIFA, Dr. Steve Thompson. I'm going to talk about 40 minutes introducing the NIFA's SBIR 8.13 program, and then subsequent speakers would spend about 20 minutes talking about their involvement with SBIR, some of the success stories, and some words of wisdom as you think of applying to this program. And at the end of each speaker will take few questions, about 5 minutes for each. Yeah. So with that, I'm happy to introduce all the panel members here, and then we'll go about the presentations. Dr. Steve Thompson is with NIFA. He's a national program leader there. He manages several grant programs, for example, engineering for agricultural production systems, and NSF collaborative programs such as you might have heard NRI, National Robotic Initiative, and Cyber Physical Systems. Since last year, there's also collaborative AI Institute type of projects or fund programs are running out there. He has a PhD from University of Florida, and he has done extensive research before moving to NIFA. You can read through this. He was working in aerial applications as a crop to figure out crop protection materials and such. Some of the application technologies research there. He has worked extensively in irrigation management, some modeling, decision support systems and such, in the ballpark of precision agriculture there. And before moving to NIFA, he, after PhD, I think he started with Virginia Tech. He was associate professor there, and then he moved to USDA ARS. Several years worked there as a lead scientist, and he has co-authored 100+ publications there, and several extension articles, and also developed some softwares. That's Dr. Steve Thompson. Then we will have next speaker would be Dr. Jim Dooley, who is the co-founder and chief technology officer for Forest Concepts. And actually, Jim is the one who was pushing us to do this webinar. So thank you, Jim. And Jim, has over 45 years of industry experience. Understanding the combination of plant biology and integrating that with the expertise or aspects of engineering and such there to develop several innovative products, process, and equipment. Jim comes from Cal Poly, and then he was at UC Davis, and his PhD was at University of Washington, then on forest resources and forest engineering. If you don't know, Jim was president of ASABE. I don't know which year, Jim, you can probably say that later. And he was also president of IB. Oh, he was in 2008. There, it says there, sorry. And yeah, he's involved with ASABE, IB, and AIMB as well. And over the years, he has, several patents and several, technologies coming out through the NIFA SBIR program from NIFA and also NSF, I believe. And Jim, please add anything that I'm missing as you speak later on. And then our third panelist is Dr. Kane Giles. He's a founder of SenseFlow, but you might know him from UC Davis. He was a faculty there for several years in biological and agricultural engineering. He is the expert in application technologies. And you probably know pulse width modulation technology and such. That comes from his research at California Davis and his PhD work at, I think, University of Georgia to some part. He is a fellow of ASABE and also fellow of National Academy of Inventors. He has received several awards from ASABE. Some of the awards you may know already. And then importantly, he has 20 some patents in US, Canada, Australia, and at other international probably countries. And yeah, he has managed, I think, 10 SBIR projects, phase 1, phase 2 projects. You will know about this a little bit later. And so it'll be very, interesting to hear his perspective on some of this. And what is not written here is he has also managed the SBIR panel, the SBIR 8 NIFA 8.13 panel from the SBIR. So yeah, and then our last panelist would be Joshua Resnick. He is the CEO of Parallel Flight Technologies. He's not there, but he will be joining soon. So again, Joshua, comes from engineering background. He has worked, hybrid and electrical powertrain systems there. Before starting this Parallel Flight Technologies, I think he was with Tesla. He was working on the, electrical systems there for semi-truck. And then also he was with state of Alaska, helping them developing hybrid electrical fishing boats to some extent. And and he, of course, loves hiking and flying the RC helicopters. So these are our panelists. And again, going forward, we'll start with each of the speaker, and Momin is again handling the Q&A session there. Yeah, so if you have any questions, I think you can type in the chat window as well, and we'll try to take them as much as we could. So with that, I think I'll hand the screen back to our first speaker, Dr. Steve Thompson, to get going with this webinar. Yeah.
Thank you very much. For 30 minutes, 8.13 won't fill the time, so I'm going to talk about the general SBIR STTR program and highlight the 8.13 program. Now, Vicki Finkenstadt will actually be available. So when she comes on, I asked her to interrupt me to insert things as I go. And so we're gonna go back and forth, to highlight some other stuff. So here we go. Okay. The Zoom screen will blank out on me. So let's see, screen number 2. Can you see it?
We can.
Okay, let's get the full screen on here. Okay, hopefully it's on full screen. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the general program and then highlight 8.13, which is the engineering program. So let's get started. So many of these slides, most of them are supplied by Melinda Kaufman, who's the director of the entire program. And she's the one to talk with on many of the procedural things. Okay, so STTR is new for us, and I'm going to attempt to outline the needs, what you need to do to qualify for that one. So as you know, these programs are meant to stimulate technical innovations, increase the commercialization, and then another very important aspect is to encourage participation by underserved populations. We have our non-discrimination statement, which you can see there. Give you a second. We have two phases within NIFA that we deal with. We have the phase one, which determines it's to test feasibility and commercial potential of your idea. And then the phase two is based on phase one results. You can expand the phase one R&D, and phase three would be, continuation of commercialization efforts, and this would be achieved through external other funding sources. Now, our budget for phase one has increased. In the past, it was $100K per proposal. Now we're up to 125 and 175. 8.13 is 175. The SBIR, 8 months. Most of the time we have to grant extensions on that. I'll be honest with you right away, because 8 months is sometimes not long enough to get everything done. STTR is 12 months, and then we have the phase two, which is at a higher level, and I'll talk about supplements in a minute. Annual budget's about 34 million. Now, here's some differences between the SBIR and STTR with NIFA. Nonprofits or federally funded centers may apply to SBIR. If anybody would like to know whether they qualify, if there's something iffy, please contact Melinda Kaufman. I will give you her email address at the end. STTR is a must for this element. Participation of a nonprofit research institution, 33% or less than 50% for phase two. STTR, 30 to 60% for both. Primary employment of the PI must be employed with a small business for SBIR. STTR, either a small business or a nonprofit research institution. Now, these slides will be available later if you'd like to see them. I don't think there's any issue with that. Vicki, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're on yet. The final one, cooperative agreement required. No for the SBIR, STTR, absolutely. Now, these are stats from the previous 2 years. Phase one is set at 15% typically funding rate. We were a little higher in FY20 because we had some additional money for some specific projects that one or more of us NPLs really wanted to fund if there was money. But typically is 15%. And in fact, that is across the board, 15%. I'll jump ahead here, but 8.13 historically has had the highest number of applications. But that means we have the most money to fund projects. Phase two, a much higher funding rate. As you can see across the board, this is for the whole program, not just 8.13, obviously. And obviously, these are some of the success metrics, which I alluded to before. These programs are investigator initiated. They're based on scientific and technical merit, qualifications, and truly commercial potential of the innovation. Subcontracting universities and federal labs are encouraged, and technical and business assistance. That adds a little bit more, and it's very useful. Now, this was introduced a ways back. The TABA, about 3 years old here. It can include everything you see here, and we actually have assistance at NIFA to guide you as to how to do this if you're not if you're not that well versed in the procedures here. Phase one, TABA, 6,500 to develop the commercialization plan. And in phase 2, it's 50K to accelerate the commercialization of that innovation to market. So we have different levels according to whether you're phase 1 or phase 2. Here are some of the technology areas that are involved in the entire program. You can see at the bottom, 8.13 is what I'm going to highlight now, some of the aspects of that. So many players on this. Vicki is the lead NPL. I managed this program for a couple of years before she came on board. I am very thankful that Vicki came on board. She's taking many of the programs I had before, and she's got a lot of different new things coming on too, or have come on. Olivia Moreno is the program specialist. Mitzi Combs, that's a familiar name to any panelist that has served on this program for payment and participation, all the procedures you need to go through. That goes for panel managers also. I mentioned Melinda Kaufman. If any of you do have questions, you can route some of them to me or Vicki, but most of the time, if we cannot answer, we will route them to Melinda. There are 2 overall program specialists for the entire SBI program, and then David Songstad is somewhat of a scientific director, NPL, and then you have Tim Connor, who's over the whole thing, and he deals with the monetary aspects too, and approves our. We will give a set of proposals we would like to be funded. We usually put one more in there and then cross our fingers that that maybe we will get that extra. So this is all in the request for applications, but it's an engineering program. The third one, down the research priorities, is pretty new, the pollinators and crop production. You can see the deadline for phase 1 is October 25th. And just highlight some of these things. This is all in the request for applications, but enhancement of commercial horticulture production, harvesting and post-harvest of specialty crops, cyber-physical systems to support precision ag. And this can mean plant precision ag or precision livestock farming, for example. So it's plant and animal. Controlled environment agriculture, we get a fair number of applications in that area. And then just general climate smart agriculture, which is a pretty broad term, but we are interested in monitoring tech solutions for monitoring greenhouse gases in particular. Plant protection, that's an area I'm familiar with. Improved chemical application technology, and point 2 is somewhat redundant there. It also, well, no, actually it isn't. It's talking about the off-target drift and worker safety. So increasing product efficacy and corresponding reduction of off-target drift. Monitoring, detection, and management of pests and abiotic stresses, machine-assisted detection of plant pathogens and pests needs to focus on engineering methods, decision support analysis. Now, here I'll stop and tell you that many of the applications that come in, it's not extremely clear whether it should be biased towards engineering or biology. So we make sure that it gets in the right place. The NPL for 8.12 and Vicki and I in 8.13 correspond frequently. When there's a proposal that's, that could apply to either one, we usually discuss it and make sure that that proposal gets in the right place. So that's kind of related to our last point there. And then pollinators and crop production. You can see all aspects of pollination, improving pollination outcomes, reducing mortality. That's been a big issue. And then now Vicki had put together these statistics, which are pretty in depth. And so in our program, this is good stuff here. So take a look. 20 out of 83 proposals were ranked high priority, 24%. That means that many in the high priority did not get funded. Outstanding, those will be funded. Typically, we don't have that. We don't have 4 is a bit high. This last year, we had a higher number of the ones that were ranked outstanding. 5 were women-owned businesses. 2 proposals were deemed high risk, high reward. 2 have established CRADAs, which I will get into in a minute. And 1 was a result of the NSF's I-Corps program. And so if she's online, she can, Vicki can probably expand on this. Here are some examples of projects. We had 2 in the middle, number 2 and number 3 dealt with spray drift management, which I thought was interesting. And you can see fairly wide range of topics here. We also have animal, precision livestock. We have funded those in the past. And I just mentioned 8.2. That's one that complements ours. All these others count. 8.12, small and mid-sized farms. There have been some times where Dennis Abadagi and I have had to get together to see whether a proposal should fit in ours or that one. And then you see the AFRI programs at the bottom. Okay, and a new one is A1551, which has been spun off of the basic A1521 program. These are typical timelines. We try to hold to those. It's not always easy, but we try to. This is the phase 1 timeline, where the deadline is October, typically, and reviews take place in this range, December to February. And then similar for phase 2, which are only open to phase 1 awardees, by the way. So the review process, we have our peer review panel. And I believe for phase 2, we have 5 panelists per proposal. I mean, 5 panelists per proposal. 3, now correct me if I'm wrong, Vicki, if you're on, I believe it's 3 from, say, academia, et cetera, and then 2 industry folks for phase 2 are required. Those 5 instead of 3 for phase 1. Now, this is a question that we get, and I'm going to walk my way through this here. University and government scientist involvement. Scientists may serve as consultants, obviously, or receive a subcontract and continue to work full-time, limited to no more than 1/3 of the phase 1 award and 1/2 of the phase 2. They may serve as PI by reducing employment at their home institution to 49% to the duration of the grant. And we've had a situation like this before. We don't like the reviewers to comment on these aspects. We would rather have this application okayed ahead of time. So when it goes to panel, that the panel can not question whether the scientist qualifies, for example, and just concentrate on the review, because that can produce unnecessary negative biases. Now, it's not acceptable for university and government scientists to serve as consultants and have all the research done in their lab, however. Now, STTR, a little different animal. The PI can be employed with a small business or research institution. Small business must perform 40% of the work, research institution at least 30, and the other 30 or so can be outsourced. CRADA, I was with ARS and we had CRADAs with companies. This is encouraged when it's possible. The company to get into an agreement with a federal agency. In my case, it was ARS. Look at the bottom one there. If two or more applications are approximately equal merit, the existence of a CRADA with a federal laboratory or license to USDA technology will be let's just say will be an important consideration. Now, some of this may be obvious, but maybe not. Factors that improve chances of award success have a good balance of high risk, high reward. Needs to be of high technical merit, good consultants, business expertise, and strong letters of support from potential phase 3 partners, end users, consumers, and investors. Not a letter that just says, oh, well, this is, there needs to be some meat in that letter. There needs to be something strongly written, not just, oh, well, we're interested in this and form letter type isn't going to do. And a clear understanding of the sustainability in the market. Now, you have to be registered, and there are 3 places you have to have. The company has to be registered with SBIR, SAM, and I used to see DUNS in here, but that kind of goes without saying. Create a grants.gov username and account. That takes some time, so have to get started on this stuff. I've already said some of this, but contact the NPL for a consult. We are extremely busy, but that's the favorite thing Vicki and I like to do is to talk to people. There's some really interesting ideas coming across. Follow the application guidelines and be a student of the RFA. That's what I would say, be a student of the RFA. I think the SBIR request for applications is written a little bit better than the AFRI. It makes, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I think it makes more logical sense. Provide a vision. What's the market opportunity? What is the alignment with USDA priorities? Have enough detail in your experimental plan. Provide insight into the commercial potential and show connectivity with the communities. Okay, here are some websites for application assistance. And I'm not going to, your next presenters talk about success stories, but I'm just going to summarize a few of them. And these are some older ones, some of these. Prairie Aquatech, natural process to convert soybean meal to fish feed using microbial enhancement. Now, these weren't funded in 8.13 necessarily, but these are some that we have indicated. Developed Stony Creek Colors. This is quite interesting. Developed an agriculture supply chain to replace synthetic dyes with plant-based drop-in solutions. Bio-preferred indigo dye. Sonsite wind. Manufacture, I believe this one actually was in our program, but this is an old one. Manufacture advanced small wind turbines that successfully compete with rooftop solar, even in moderate wind areas. Very interesting. This one's been probably 20 years old. This company developed a higher throughput technology, polio vaccination, and provide benefits to enhance efficiency and bird performance. This company was purchased by Pfizer, by the way. Now, there's a brochure you can get online, and it will summarize many things about both programs. And here are the contacts. Vicky, lead program leader. I'm a co-program leader. And then here are the email addresses of the others. Melinda Kaufman with a C. She's one that can give you an idea on procedural things. So please visit our website. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Steve, for your nice presentation. We have a question to you. Is USDA NIFA considering switching to open submission windows year-round similar to NSF?
What was that now about NSF?
Like the considering switching to open submission windows year-round.
Oh, I don't think so. Only because of the management nightmare this could be. You know, NSF does that with many of their programs. We are doing that on a selective basis. I don't think SBIR will be one of them.
Okay, I don't see any more question, so I think we can move to our next presenter. If anyone has question, please type in the chat box. We'll address later as well.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, our next presenter will be Dr. Jim Dooley.
My unmute wouldn't unmute. You should be able to see full screen. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you, love. Good afternoon, everybody in the US and whatever time zone you're in. My talk is going to be about our 20-year relationship between my company, Forest Concepts, and USDA SBIR program. It'll give some of our overview of our company and why we work with SBIRs, and then one case study. Things here. You heard my background. Really, the key thing is that I've spent my entire career in industry. Started in the sugarcane industry, then with Weyerhaeuser Timber Company for 18 years, and then since 1995 have formed 3 companies, currently Forest Concepts, that work across where plant biology, engineering, natural resources come together. And our company is a technology company. So at the end of the day, we develop technologies, introduce them to market, get them established in the marketplace, and then hand those technologies off as going businesses to others through licensing agreements. So we've worked on everything from post-harvest, in-home storage of fresh fruits and vegetables, a lot of work in natural resource protection, and really for the last 15 years have focused on biomass feedstocks from agriculture and forest resources. We currently have 10 full-time regular employees. We started in 1998 with 3 people. 2 of our other co-founders have since retired. Our current leadership team is myself, Mike Perry is CEO. Mike came to us in 2006 out of the medical diagnostics industry, but had been CEO of several startups, which is really the skill he brought in. And then Dave Lanning, many of you know through his participation in ASABE. Dave's our senior engineer. We have a revolving cast of characters in the engineering and shop. One of the things we pride ourselves in is being a training proving grounds. In the picture at the bottom, about half of those people have since gone to work for other companies. One is working for Blue Origin as a designer. Another, Amy Vo, is a senior engineer now with a company that makes the tracking tags for fish for international seafood companies. Key thing to Forest Concepts that really drives our technology is that we look at what are going to be the big deal issues out in time. If we're developing technology, if we're not at least 6 to 10 years in anticipation of when the market will emerge on something, we're probably going to be too late by the time we get to market. And we'll talk about that again a little bit later with the example of wood straw. We only work on really big projects, big deal projects. Drying energy has been a major focus for us lately. Drying energy consumes 70% of all the energy in a wood pellet plant. It consumes 5% of the total industrial energy in the United States, according to Department of Energy's Advanced Manufacturing Office. Feedstock, jams, and biofuel plants reduce output by 20 to 30%. We do market assessments at the beginning. We focus on science and so on. We do a lot of advanced marketing to make sure that there's going to be customers, clients when we get done. We have a relationship with patent organization to file patents. A big part of our research is to support the claim structure. Go. Patents are important to us because we license and sell technology, and USDA and other SBIR programs are key to that. I think one thing that Steve didn't mention that's probably worth pointing out is that inventions that are made under federal funds have a shared ownership with the federal government. Although the federal government doesn't receive any royalties, they do have some rights. So in the biomass baling arena, we have 14 issued patents, and that some of those were under USDA or Department of Energy support. Biomass beneficiation, cleaning of biomass for feedstocks. Wood straw we'll talk about as the case study, and then bioeconomy. But you know, patents are important to us. They're expensive to get, but they're vital when you get to the marketplace. We have a number of trademarks. One of the things we do very early in a project is we figure out what the trade name's going to be, which helps us start to establish market recognition during the development, and that facilitates moving into commercial space. Part of our business model from the inception of the company has been to leverage SBIR and other competitive federal programs. The SBIR programs do a couple of things for us. One, they help us manage the disciplined preliminary work. So if we know we're going to do an application, just like those of you in universities, you know you've got to have good preliminary data. You know that you've got to have market analysis, and that knowing that we're going to go for competitive grants or venture capital funding tells us that we've got to have that well-executed experiments up front. Writing the proposal itself is an exercise in making sure that we understand the literature, technical gaps, the preferred solution, and a path to market. So that at that point, we really sort of solidify where we're going to go and how we're going to get there. And that as a small company, the SBIR funding we see as incremental funding to our own support. And really the SBIR funding enables us to do a depth of science. We'll probably run more replications. We'll probably do better science than we would if we were on our own money and really trying to spread the funds as thin as possible to get to the market. So with that background on our company, out of the SBIRs that we've had, this one started a long time ago, but many people in ASABE recognize wood straw, particularly those in the soil and water arena. And it really got off the ground with SBIR support. And so I'll show you on the timeline, but it's a success story. Charlie Cleland, who was the director of the SBIR program for many years, used this as one of his success stories on Capitol Hill during the early 2000s. But wood straw is a wood strand alternative to agricultural hay. It was developed in response to invasive species spreading in forest and wildlands of the United States from agricultural straw. ASABE recognized this technology with an A50 award in 2006, and in 2008 with the Engineering Concept of the Year reward. And you know, some other things on this slide is erosion control materials are a state's right, so there's no federal certification for that. They have to be approved state by state. So mostly Department of Transportation departments where they're used on roads and highways, or Department of Ecology, other places. And for Steve and Vicky's benefit, there's a notice down here in the bottom of this screen, which anybody who works with SBIRs or any other federal contracts recognizes that we give credit to the program that helped fund this. Wood straw was initially developed with the sense that the market was going to be one on natural lands, wildlands, and the technical performance, surprisingly, shouldn't have been surprising, but it was broadly picked up across the built environment. Because the wood strands are made from 100% recycled post-industrial veneer, we were able to get LEED, gold, and silver credits for users. So commercial building people started using it instead of hydromulch and straw and that kind of stuff. The Department of Transportation started using the material, like in this Sunset Interchange, as an alternative to straw, agricultural straw mulch, because of its stability and technical performance. Primary drive for developing it with the Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management was for use on wildfire sites like this 4 Mile Canyon fire in Colorado, which was one of the first commercial sites. National parks use it because it's 100% natural wood material and is not bringing non-native materials back into the forested national parks. But from a commercial standpoint, since we introduced it commercially in 2006, we've received more than $5 million in revenue. It's been used across 9 states. We have licensees in Washington, Colorado, and Oregon. And we provide tech support to them, but we're no longer directly engaged in manufacturing. And to the focus of the SBIR program, one of the things that's important is that you have impact beyond your own company or your community. So with current application in 9 states, it has a national impact on soil and water quality, provides jobs in rural communities, and provides a value-added use for forest products. One of the things that every SBIR typically talks about is how fast you can get through the SBIR program, and that the commercialization plan always says, in the first year, I'm going to get $1 million in sales, and the second year, I'm going to get $5 million in sales, and I'm going to saturate the market in 3 or 4 years. The world doesn't work that way. And that of the major projects we've had that have been SBIR supported, they all have similar timelines. We don't break even for about 10 years after we've completed an SBIR project, but wood straw was invented in 1996, one of those aha kind of things, but we sat on it until 2000 when the market sort of came to us after some major invasive species issues on federal lands. We partnered with the Forest Service Erosion Research Lab, Bill Elliott, Pete Robichaux, Randy Foltz, to do the SBIR Phase 1 in 2002. Completed the SBIR track in 2005 and launched production. We were fortunate in that Dale Bosworth was the chief of the Forest Service at that time, and he gave us a $500,000 contract, which basically bought out our first year's production. And that was really our incentive to move to production quickly. 2012, we finally brought on our first licensee, and 2016, we were built out. So, 20 years from invention to kind of our exit of this technology and moving on to something else. Some observations that I have based on our experience. Steve and Vicki gave you some of the statistics, so it's not a surprise, but shouldn't be a surprise that if you're going to put the time into it, go for one of the top 5. Those of you that are in academia are also probably understand that too, but out of the 80 applications, you want to make sure that you make it in the top set. It takes us an average of 100 to 150 hours to write a good proposal. So plan ahead, start early. One of the big drives I had to convince Darren Drollinger and others to get this webinar in this month was that you've only got a little more than that much time between now and when proposals are due. And then the reality is that in the panels, some of our really good proposals ended up below the cut line. We've learned to accept that with SBIR Phase 1s. Fortunately, you can go back on second year. On a second year, our success rate is probably about 80% where we have chosen to go back. And then personally, I've been on both sides of the table as a proposer and occasionally as a reviewer. And I'm really to the credit of the SBIR program across all the agencies. It really supports its mission. So I encourage those of you that have an idea, want to take something and could use the support of the federal agency, I encourage you to get involved in the process. One more thing, there's a deadline. I think we heard the deadline's October 25th or October 25th. Submit early. As a company, we tend to submit 3 to 4 days early. And you never want to hit the submit button with about 20 minutes to go on a grant cycle anywhere and get this message. Thank you. Momin, if you've got some questions, we can take them.
Hi, Jim. Thank you for your nice presentation and sharing your and your company experience working with SBIR projects. Yeah, I see one question, but it is the questioner suggested to discuss at the end of the presentation. So I think we can move forward to our next presentation. Professor Ken Giles to talk about some of the success stories regarding SBIR projects. Professor Ken, the floor is now for you.
Ken, you're muted, by the way. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Love. Hopefully everyone can both hear and see me. Is that true?
It is, yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this webinar today, and thanks to Love and all the organizers for the opportunity. As introduced earlier, my first life was as a professor at UC Davis, and my next life is working with a company called Ogive Technology. SenseFlow was kind of a cover organization for a while, and then we had a company called California Precision Dosing Incorporated that did some non-agricultural spray technologies, and now here we are as our company called Ogive Technology. And I'll talk a little bit about generally the history with much like Jim, and actually my entire presentation could be summarized as, Jim, you're right. I agree with everything you said, and it's really consistent with my experience. I've worked with SBIR for a long time, going back to 1988 when I was an ad hoc reviewer for the Phase 1 program, working with Charles Cleland, who was just a massive presence with the program for a long time. We then, as part of the university, did some subcontracting for electrostatic spraying systems in the early 90s. And then we took one of our UC Davis inventions and took it through to commercialization, actually with an SBIR, with Capstan Ag Systems, a company that really had no agricultural spray experience, and worked with multiple Phase 1 and Phase 2s through the 2000s with that company. Then I served as a panel manager, have been a panelist, then worked with Russ Stocker, proposing an SBIR with Russ, with Arena Pesticide Management, then back for stint as a panel manager, then as a panelist, and now the research director, project director of an SBIR with Ogive Technology. One thing I can say from experience, and if you look at that history, you see that it had some academic time, some industrial time, panelists, reviewers, then back to companies that were doing SBIRs, writing and managing the proposals, and the potential for not only a perceived but an actual conflict of interest was certainly there when you are in that situation. And the one thing that I would say to people that are watching this webinar that are engaged, hired by a university or professors or academics, is that those potential conflicts, you can manage them very ethically and very responsibly. So it certainly can be done. It does require that you know the expectations of your institution and also the expectations and limitations of the SBIR program. And you communicate well with both of those. And so you can have, I think Steve Thompson mentioned that you have to be associated with a company. The work can't be in your laboratory in most cases. And so there are pathways to do these things, and you can have quite literally one foot in the university and another foot in the commercial world if you are responsible and alert. So you can do it. And also as Jim said, the SBIR program is just an excellent vehicle for moving an academic invention to the market. The rigor and the expectation of what you're doing from really kind of an academic lab all the way to the market, SBIR is a very good vehicle for that because both sides are covered. And I will say, as going out and fundraising and promoting your ideas and looking toward phase 3s or even getting buy-in from within your company, if you're funded by SBIR and you have the review comments from truly disinterested people, this is very favorable with investors. I'll say with caveats. One thing I hear from investors is, sure, the SBIR panel loves your project and your idea, but it's not their money that they're spending. So investors look at it as a good pre-validation of your technology, but they still want to see that you know what you're doing also. You have some advantages by being a professor and an academic in that you know the state of the art. In many cases, a company or someone in industry knows a small part of the market and what they're doing, but the overall big trends, a lot of folks in industry don't go to the academic conferences and see the things that are 15, 20 years out. So you have an advantage as an academic. You do know the state of the art, and your lit review for your phase 1 proposal will be something you're very comfortable doing. Another thing that I've noticed as an academic and also working with companies is for those of us that are ag engineers, many of our projects are funded by commodity groups or industries, and you will immediately see a need. You'll know what the needs are of the commercial sector. You'll know what societal needs are, because often it's recognized by end users of your technology, and they're coming to you and funding you in your university lab to do work. If you're getting support from, say, the Washington tree fruit agreement, you can bet that the things they're funding are important to them. And it's very straightforward to go to SBIR and say, there's a need for this technology. The other thing I've seen is the program priorities within the SBIR program. And I'll talk a little bit more about those for our specific case in a moment, but the idea of sustainability, reducing the environmental impact, those are consistent with a lot of other funding sources, and I mean private funding sources. Venture capital funds are looking to invest in technologies that provide a cleaner environment, that reduce energy use, and these priorities are very much consistent with the SBIR priorities. So if you, I think Jim said it well, writing an SBIR proposal forces you to think about where your research and your technology is going to go, and hitting those priorities with the SBIR program are the same priorities that you're going to have when you go out and start doing fundraising for your company. Talk a little bit about our specific project now. Lav was very generous and said, would you share a success story? And I will say this is perhaps a pre-success story. We are very much in real time doing this work, but I can't talk about how we developed the technology, why we chose to pursue SBIR funding, and some of the concurrent work that we've done along with our SBIR work. One thing you'll see in many of my slides is this logo for the Clean Tech Open. And I want to say one thing to academics or some startup companies that may be looking at not only the SBIR program, but other startup type of activities. We found it very just amazing, the support that is out there, often on campuses, for getting you to the point of being successful as a small company or a startup company. In particular, one of the first things we did was we went to the UC Davis Entrepreneurship Academy. And this was our first real introduction to the business, the venture capital, and the startup side of going from an idea all the way to commercialization. And the Entrepreneurship Academy was a 1-week program, very accelerated. It was 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And it's truly a boot camp for understanding the generation of a tech idea. One of the great things that came from our work with the Entrepreneurship Academy was the introduction to the Clean Tech Open. And the Clean Tech Open is a national environmentally based technologies boot camp, accelerator, funding opportunity. You actually make pitches to investors, and you can exit that program with an investment. And this was about a 6-month process with a series of webinars. It would have been in person, but we had COVID. Series of webinars and exercises with assignments that actually walk you through developing the business plan, your technology, making projections, how you engage with the business community. And I would say from our viewpoint, this has been absolutely essential to us. The Clean Tech Open, and along with the Entrepreneurship Academy, really took us from kind of the academic side of things, the R&D focus, to really thinking more about how to, as I say, how to develop a tech company, not just a project. And one thing you do is you actually learn the venture capital vocabulary. There's a different vocabulary with investors and startup and technology validation. And that was time very well spent for us. So I would encourage anyone, as you're developing your SBIR proposal, start looking at how you can develop the company. And in many cases, some of the companies that we worked with were established, but there was not a new product mindset or an R&D mindset or a startup, kind of a bootleg startup within the company structure that was there. So something like this really gets you established. Now, shifting over to what we're actually doing with Ogive technology. For many of you that are agricultural engineers, you saw one of the priorities of the program was reducing agricultural chemical use and kind of these unintended concomitant effects: air contamination, worker contamination, worker exposure, the embodied energy within the pesticides and their use, and the mitigation costs of cleanups. Agricultural chemicals are clearly one of the high priority issues in agriculture, and I've been working in this for almost 40 years, and there's always something to do related to chemical application. When we looked at the problem, and also I'll say that these boot camps and the Clean Tech Opens, the type of experience makes us as ag engineers really think much broader to things like sustainability, not just of the industry, but of the company, even things like diversity, equity, and inclusion in your advisory board for your company. There were exercises for us where we sat down and we said, okay, our industry is not particularly diverse, but how do we make a diverse company? So one of the things that we looked at was, well, what about ag chemicals? What are some of the big numbers? And we generated the numbers. You can go find how much pesticide is used. It's in the billions. And you think about the investment in bringing a new chemical to market, close to $300 million in 11 years or so. And you think about how your technology could reduce that. So from the standpoint of speaking with non-agricultural folks about a better technology for chemical application, these are the numbers they need to know. They may not be familiar as we are with the industry. So we actually generated these data. We went out and said, okay, what would really be the impact of what we're doing here? A big question is energy use, certainly now with tremendous attention to our use of fossil fuels and the understanding that we're just going to be moving away from these fossil fuels and carbon emissions. So we looked and actually found data on the embodied energy in pesticides and then converted that to actual emissions of CO2 as we reduce that pesticide use. So we might think about agricultural spraying and spray drift and better targeting of technology, but we can actually also concurrently generate a very defensible prediction of the environmental effects of what we're doing. So we actually came up with a number. About 40 million barrels of oil could be reduced if we did a better job of spraying. And we actually, from there, looked at the something like 17 million metric tons of CO2. As an engineer, I say, wow, these numbers may be off by an order of magnitude, but it's a very good start for understanding the impact of what we're doing. And as you go with SBIR proposals, as you go with looking at phase 3 funding commitments or directly funding from investors concurrent with your SBIR, these numbers are often important for venture capital funds. So now let's talk about the technology and where we were motivated. Well, we actually looked at everything that's happening in precision ag and said, we're still trying to, at the very end of the day, push everything through a spray nozzle. It's a legacy component. It often is the limiting factor in realizing new technology. Very hard to control. It's designed to be a static device, and it's a relatively imprecise component. If you think about everything that's done now with product delivery, it's the last mile logistics, the Amazon guy who hands you the package, that's kind of that last mile. For everything we do in precision ag, often that nozzle is the last 4 inches of delivering that decision, that chemical, to the target. When we look at precision ag, one of the things that we have to think about is the market. And certainly in SBIR and startup, we look at the market and we found industry data that showed the very rapid growth of nozzle control technologies, but still using that basic nozzle. And we look at some of these markets, for example, turn compensation went from, it didn't exist in 2017 to having about a 30% market share by 2020. So very rapid adoption of these technologies. So what OGIVE Technology is doing and what was funded by the SBIR phase 1 is a dynamically controllable nozzle. We look at that legacy technology of this, what used to be a brass nozzle with an orifice. We then use advanced materials and design to create a controllable orifice. We integrate micro actuators and electronics down to the level of some of the haptic actuators from the consumer electronics industry, and we end up with a very controllable nozzle. And this is where we go with that last 4 inches of delivery and logistics. I think this is hopefully we'll see this video. This was our initial design work in designing the nozzle. This is one of our early designs and prototypes, and we've improved on it since then. This is one of the actual prototypes under the microscope being actuated. So essentially, we can go with a 10-fold range of flow control in a nozzle. That's the core technology. Well, what's been the impact of the SBIR funding? Well, we're at the point of concluding our phase 1. We have very favorable reviews. Said it could be a game-changing technology. We were definitely high risk, high reward. As Steve Thompson said, the SBIR program does encourage collaboration outside. And I'll say that venture capital also likes to see this. So we worked with the University of Hawaii, USDA, ARS. So I've said SBIR funding provides some assurance to the investors and collaborators that it's not a crackpot idea. And I think, as Jim said in his comments, it requires you, when you write that proposal and when you do the project, to have more of a plan and to replicate and collect more data and document better than you would if you were just in the pure innovation. You have $100 million from investors, run to your building and solve the problem. Going through the SBIR program, it's more of a methodical engineering academic approach. One of the things that you will have to do is look at the market. At least for us, we see 2 markets: emerging vehicles, UAVs, autonomous vehicles doing very precise chemical application. We also see a market in the legacy of the conventional equipment, conventional flow control for both ground and aerial vehicles. You have to think about quantifying your market. And some of our initial work was to make assumptions, and our very best guess, based on our experience and talking with the people in the industry about what's the size of the market, how many vehicles are going out. It can be difficult or easy to get this information, but it's certainly something you need for your phase 2, and it's very helpful with your phase 1. We also, at OGI Technology, we always say you got to know what you don't know. And we've worked a lot with application technology, but we don't know marketing very well. So we actually went to an outside vendor to do a market analysis for us. And so these are companies that are very skilled at looking at a market. We asked them to look at the North America and Europe ag flow control and application control market. They identify the growing trends in those markets, things that we didn't know about. They even look at mergers, acquisitions. They somehow have ways of getting this information. And at the end of the day, from our market study that we commissioned, we saw that in 2027, it is about almost an $800 million market overall for application technologies, flow control devices. We say, well, even if we're a small part of that, that's the size of a market that will attract attention from investors, and we can build a business based on this information. One of the key things that's important for SBIR and also going out for investment is, who's your team? What's the experienced people that you have? And so they're actually interested in, okay, exactly who's going to do this? So that, plus our attention on sustainability and environmental and social good, causes you to think about how you create your team. And another thing is to, especially with small companies, an advisory board or an advisory group, people that can guide you as you go from this idea to the marketplace. One thing we learned very quickly is to connect and get more information and bring in a larger group of people. Investors are also interested in what are potential industry exits. And of course, we've had a couple of big ones lately. Blue River went to John Deere, Raven went to CNH, and these are spray application, essentially spray application exits from a small company being absorbed by a large one. Investors like to know this. And that's the overview that I have for today. I hope it's been useful to you from thinking about SBIR and the involvement, and a small company that's doing a nozzle project. And as we say at OGI, now you have a friend in the nozzle business.
Thank you, Professor Kane. It was a wonderful presentation, especially like me as a young researcher, how to develop a tech company for SBI grant, especially for SBI research grant. Thank you. We have one question actually from Shannon. In relation to Love's work on beyond small UAS applications for Precision Ag, have you been working with heavy lift UAS to test the utility of your sprayer with mid and larger UAS?
Yeah, very good question. We are still at the lab bench stage with our technology. And one of our target markets, as you saw, is the UAV market, primarily because they are so payload and energy limited. And so we focused on a very light solution, very low power. We're talking milliwatts for control actuation. And so the short answer is no. The long answer is that is one of our target markets.
So Shannon has another question actually. How can we read about this work?
What was the question?
Can we read about this work somewhere, any publications or report?
We will be giving a presentation at the AAB conference in Germany next month. That's the International Advances in Pesticide Application. And I think that's going to be one of our first actual presentations. We will have a paper from that conference, and I'll be happy to share it.
Great. I don't see any more questions in the chat box. Yeah. Yeah, so if no more question, then I think we can move to our next presenter, Joshua Resnick from Parallel Flight Technologies. I believe Joshua is here.
Yes, I'm here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Joshua.
Great. Should I just dive right into my presentation?
Yeah, sure, feel free.
Great, okay. I'm gonna share my screen here. Let's see. Is this coming through for everyone?
That's great.
Awesome. So yeah, I'm Joshua Resnick. I am the CEO of Parallel Flight Technologies, and we have been very fortunate to be the recipient of several SBIR grants, which I will just refer to as Sbir's during this talk. I think a lot of people do that. It makes it a lot quicker. We've had Sbir's from NASA, NSF, and most recently from USDA. We're currently engaged in a phase 2 Sbir from USDA for large scale prescribed fire. So this is a little bit of a mouthful, but the title of our presentation here is Advanced UAS Aerial Ignition Solution for Wildfire Mitigation and Risk Reduction. So this has been, part of the founding dream of Parallel for a long time, was to see what we could do to minimize the damage caused by wildfire. And when we founded the company in 2018, this was after the first time when my house almost burned down. So my house has almost burned down twice now due to wildfire. And during the first time, it was one of those kind of aha moments. What technology could be brought to bear to really support wildfire fighting in ways that they can't currently do with autonomous solutions. So we spent a lot of time meeting with industry and trying to see like what their fundamental constraints were with the current drone technology. And I was especially fortunate to meet up with Mark Bathrick, who is the head of aviation for the Department of the Interior at the time. He's now on our board, which is fantastic. And you know, a kind of industry wide, whether it was at the government level, you know, the federal level or the state government level, or even the smaller firefighting agencies, when we talked about drones, we kind of heard the same story over and over again, which was that, yeah, we've got a bunch of drones for reconnaissance. We can do, hold on one second here. We can do reconnaissance. We can do, you know, kind of search and rescue or search and sustain operations where we look for people. But what we can't really do is lift heavy payloads for a long time and deliver these payloads. And the key missions that they were looking for were things like tactical resupply, bringing things like hose, water, you know, drinking water, food, and other supplies, tools to the firefighters in the front lines. The other part of the mission that they were really struggling with was doing prescribed fire. They had begun doing some prescribed fire exercises and gaining some prescribed fire capability with electric drones, but the square, you know, the acreage that could be ignited in per flight was very limited, and the flight time was very limited. So the base of operations would have to get moved around a lot. So you know, it was starting to become useful, but just not really meeting at you know, the kind of scale that's required. So the fundamental technology limitations that they were encountering were electric drones that could only fly for 15 minutes with a heavy payload. There were some hybrid things that were out there. There were some hybrid options out there, but they didn't have long flight duration. And there were also, you know, autonomous helicopters that were out there, but they're extremely expensive. So with these limitations, we set out to, you know, start developing a solution that, you know, that could be more broadly applicable. So we really kind of started from the ground up, and we developed a new type of hybrid drone specifically tailored for heavy payload. So this is Firefly. This is our first product, which is in testing currently at our headquarters here in California. It can carry 100 pounds of payload for 1.6 hours with roughly half hour of fuel reserve, and is capable of covering up to 125-mile radius at full payload. So the flight times become drastically longer. You know, you're approaching almost 4 hours of flight time when you have very small payloads, but at full payload, at full 100 pounds, you're talking 1.6 hours of flight time. So really radical levels of endurance compared to other products that were on the market. This is a scalable technology, so eventually we can even go bigger. And this is a very safe technology in terms of the level of redundancy that's built in here. And this is all part of our proprietary powertrain design, this parallel hybrid system. So we had a lot of support doing this, and I'll get into some of the details of that support. But you know, one of the first grants, I think the very first Sbir we had was a NASA Phase 1, and that helped us develop some key redundancy technology for the aircraft. And you know, this is the kind of thing that you generally wouldn't engage in at such an early stage unless you were getting that kind of support. We had NSF funding for developing some of the advanced simulation technology. And we'll talk a little bit more about, especially what the USDA funding helped supply. It's not, you know, we're not just developing an aircraft, we're developing a full stack solution. There's a number of different technologies that all work together along with the propulsion system, so that we end up developing a technology solution for the customer. So in the case of prescribed fire, we're working with a payload designer, with a you know, with the end user, with the customers, to develop an end-to-end solution that's going to solve their problem. So we're not just selling drones, we're selling full solutions. In terms of the development of our product and our technology, you know, we started really playing with this in 2019. We incorporated around that time. You know, we raised some seed money from family and friends, and then, you know, brought in our first NASA Sbir. Then in 2020, we demonstrated a much more advanced prototype, so way beyond just proof of concept, something that was actually giving us performance metrics, which were useful. Raised more capital. And this is something I can talk about, happy to answer questions about. We raised 1.07 million through Reg CF crowdfunding, regulation crowdfunding. At the time, we went out to a bunch of venture capital firms, and at that point in the cycle, drones were kind of a sketchy topic in the VC world, where there had been some pretty big failures, like Airware had collapsed, and a lot of the venture capital groups just were they're pretty gun shy. And I saw this opportunity with crowdfunding, and it's turned out to be very good for us. Yet it also has its limitations, which are pretty, it's not a panacea for funding. Let's just put it that way. It can be very useful. Happy to answer some questions about it. It worked quite nicely with the Sbir funding because we were able to show our investor base that we were getting funding from NSF and NASA and then USDA. And this was very encouraging for our investors. We used that capital to iterate the technology, get to TRL 6, and do some more flight demonstrations and testing in 2021. We raised 6.5 million with crowdfunding and then started our USDA phase 2, which we're still working on right now. And that brings us up to the current time. We raised a little bit more money this year, but we're also now heavily engaged with the venture capital market. And there's a lot of excitement around the technology and especially around the validation that comes with Sbir's. So that's obviously one of the big pieces that I strongly encourage everybody listening here to recognize, is that once you've got Sbir funding, especially phase 2s, this is really validating for the venture capital community and for the investment community in general. So, I think I mentioned under NASA, we developed this clutch system and some of our core technology. And then under NSF, we focused really on software and simulation and flight controller technology. And this has been a, really, that was a very exciting grant to work on. And we're waiting on potentially a phase 2. And then with the USDA, it's been focused exclusively on prescribed burns. So we have a partner, Drone Amplified. They've been working in the space for a long time. They make a product called Ignis. You can see the logo there. We've been very fortunate to bring in a number of partners, the Colorado Center of Excellence, Grayback Forestry, as key partners for these grants to help support from the customer side. And then, like I said, our payload manufacturer, Ignis, or Drone Amplified is the name of the company. Ignis is the product. And we're very fortunate to be working with them. They're really leaders in the space. And I think this is another important point, right? You gotta identify what your key strengths are as a company and focus on those. Like, our key strength is this heavy lift, long endurance platform. We're not out there to reinvent the wheel. So if there is a company that makes a payload that's useful for us, we'd rather partner with them, have them develop it to fit our aircraft, and then we can package up a solution for the customer. And that's what we're doing in this case. So this is our USDA phase 2 solution. There's a lot of a lot of applications of fire support with our aircraft. There's tactical resupply, there's search and rescue, prescribed fire, and then direct fire suppression. Right now we're focusing on prescribed fire especially. So this is a really neat use case because it extends beyond the active firefight. It's also used as a land management tool. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the way prescribed burning works is you find a fire department will identify a high risk area. They'll then make an assessment and do a study about what the burn should look like, when it should be done to minimize risk, how it should be done. There's ways of igniting these fires from the air or from with by dropping incendiary devices from a helicopter, or they can be done on the ground with people walking around with drip torches. they'll go wait for just the right weather conditions when it's very safe, and they'll go light the prescribed burn. And this is, like I mentioned, Drone Amplified has started doing this with drones, and now we're looking to expand that capability to go from something that carries 350 of these incendiary balls to something that carries almost 4,000. So this is going to be a major increase in the capability of acreage. And I'm just gonna let's see, go to the next slide here. I think the other important point when you're talking about wildfire applications is that we see these pictures, right? You see helicopters and airplanes dropping red stuff all over a fire. Well, they only do that on average 8 hours a day. They can't fly at night, and they can only fly in VFR conditions, which means no clouds, no fog on the ground, and especially when it comes to fire, no smoke hanging around the ground. So smoke inversion. So a lot, and these are very common occurrences. So in 2020, when we almost lost our house the second time, we live up in the Santa Cruz Mountains in California, there was a smoke inversion. There was no air support for that fire for almost a week and a half. So you can imagine if you can get an unmanned system in there with an infrared camera that can see right through the smoke, this is a major advantage. And it's one of the key aspects that the fire services are looking for, is something that can fly 24 hours a day. And not only that, the nighttime flying is also a big thing, because when at nighttime the fires are the weather's cooler, the winds die down, the fires are much more vulnerable at night. So being able to get in there at night is a very powerful tool. This is our integration with the Ignis 4K system. This is the system that drops these, they're called dragon eggs. These are the little incendiary devices. Basically, it's a ball filled with magnesium permanganate. It gets injected with glycol, and then it gets dropped. And by the time it hits the ground, it's starting to heat up, and then it bursts into flames. And so this system will be able to hold up to 4,000 of these spheres under our aircraft. And the aircraft has an infrared and visible spectrum camera on board. And under the USDA phase 1 Sbir, we demonstrated a feasibility study. We dropped some of these devices from one of our test aircraft and did a bunch of integration work and studies on the effect of the delivery accuracy under such a large system. Once that showed that yes, this was in fact a feasible solution, we submitted for a phase 2, and that we're in the middle of that process, in the middle of that grant right now. And the target is to be demonstrating this later this year. We have to wait for the fire season to kind of die down a little bit. Our partner has developed this much larger Ignis system, and this, when all said and done, this should be able to ignite up to 4,000 acres per flight. We have a lot of traction related to wildfire in the US. We're working very closely, obviously, with the Forest Service under USDA to develop the solution. We're working with Grayback Forestry. We have a research development agreement with them. They're a large forestry company that does a lot of wildfire related activity, and again, drone amplified. We have Mark Bathrick on our advisory board, and then also retired Chief Scott Watson, who has 40 years with Forest Service and CAL FIRE. Outside of wildfire, and I think this is kind of another important point that I'd like to emphasize. It kind of depends where your core market is, but some markets are bigger than others. So, and that's really important, especially when it comes to investment. We started as a very wildfire focused company. In fact, that was the only thing we were working on. However, we've seen that because the adoption rate is a little bit slower for wildfire technology than for other technologies, and also because it's a government, you're talking about a government procurement cycle. The reality on the ground is that that procurement cycle takes longer, significantly longer sometimes than a lot of commercial procurement cycles. So depending on what you're working on, you may want to look at other markets where you can move a little bit faster. And this doesn't mean losing sight of your perhaps environmentally focused vision. But it's, in some cases, it's necessary to help engage with investors, especially venture capital groups that want to see stuff that can get commercialized faster or maybe have a significantly larger market. So we've been really fortunate to find a lot of use cases on the global renewables side, within the Air Force, and globally. So, with different government applications. So, this has been useful for us to expand, the rate at which we commercialize, and also to attract investors. However, we are still and remain, very committed to wildfire. So, in addition to the grants that we've mentioned, we have a number of pending grants, which are phase 2s. And again, I want to encourage everybody, like, if you went through phase 1 and you were like, wow, that was a lot of work, I don't know if it was worth it. It's worth it, in my opinion, because it's a road to that phase 2, which is where you really get the larger check sizes and that full validation of your technology. So we have an active direct to phase 2 pending with the Air Force. This is for a blood delivery application. We have an active, we've got our phase 2 with USDA right now, and then we have a pending phase 2 with NSF, and this is to continue building out our simulation technology. And I think the other point to emphasize here is, like, any partnerships you can bring to the table are really valuable. So, it really, ideally, it's not just you on a grant. Like, you've partnered with somebody that's bringing an important piece of the tech so you can focus on your core strength. This is just a little bit of information about the blood delivery application. Basically, like, somebody gets wounded in the field on the front lines, they need to get blood immediately to that person for transfusion. And right now it's done by helicopter, and it's super dangerous. And 55% of these missions they're delayed due to, whether it's a canceled airdrop, weather, hostile action. There's just like a lot of stuff that can go wrong here. And a lot of it is a calculus, because you've got 3 people operating that helicopter and blood delivery, and you've got 1 guy on the ground who's in trouble. So you can understand the kind of calculus that has to happen there to make sure that mission should go forward. In any case, to save lives and reduce the amount of blood that gets wasted, going to an autonomous solution is, is really critical. So this will reduce the amount of blood that gets wasted. This will increase the speed at which it gets delivered by up to 20 minutes. And you basically have what they call that golden hour to get that blood to the wounded soldier. It'll reduce the cost of equipment and the operating costs dramatically. So order of magnitude kind of reduction in cost. I don't necessarily need to go through all of this, but the Air Force was extremely excited about our platform, and they worked very closely with us to help design the Sbir application. That is, the end user worked quite closely with us. They signed an MOU around this application, and I think it's important to recognize, like, the core technology that we've developed under NASA, NSF, and USDA all apply to these other markets and these other applications. There ends up being a lot of crossover, and I think I guess that's another, like, tip, right? If you're going after multiple Sbirs, for different agencies, a lot of times you can find ways of of tailoring them to be customized in a way that really works across all the different applications that you're developing for. So I think we've kind of boiled down kind of best practices to, you know, these kind of 5 bullet points. So I think the first point I would make is we started with a consultant to help write these proposals who had a lot of experience in the government contracting space and in the research space. And ultimately this individual ended up joining Parallel Flight as a full-time employee. So we wouldn't have been able to do this without this person working for us, because you know, you've concentrating all that grant knowledge into one person who knows how to jump through all the hoops to do write the applications with the support of the technical team to make sure the application process goes smoothly, that all the information gets in on time. It's a very complicated process. So having a dedicated individual to do nothing but write and file the grants and then manage the grants is very important, especially if you're trying to get multiple SBIRs. Then, the next thing is very quickly, you're not going to necessarily run into this immediately with your phase 1s, but if your objective is to actually get phase 2s, you really need to get DCAA compliance set up with your accounting systems. And again, our grants person has been instrumental in helping set this process up. It's non-trivial. There's a lot of I mean, you could call it busy work, but you know, it makes sense, right? Like there's a lot of documentation that has to go on, tracking hours, all of those kinds of, you know, boring administrative things. But, you know, this is obviously done to make sure that these funds are being deployed in a way that's fair and makes sense. So getting those compliance systems set up from the start is a great idea. Stay lean through demonstration. The earlier you can demonstrate your value, the sooner you can bridge the gap between SBIR, crowdfunding, and institutional investors. So, you know, pick projects that will enable you to demonstrate what your technology is really capable of and fund that demonstration, because that's what's going to bring in the investment required to scale. Develop and cultivate trusted customer development partners from the beginning. I've mentioned this a few times. Figure out the other technologies that need to play with yours to make a successful solution. You know, work on your core strengths. Continuously network and listen to successful SBIR winners. So yeah, reach out to people who've done this. Figure out what they've done to be successful, and don't be shy to ask advice. We've done it a lot of times. We've had companies that have won multiple SBIRs review our applications. We've lost several. SBIRs don't give up, right? You're going to win some, you're going to lose some, and that's just the way it is. So, you know, it's kind of a numbers game. And if, you know, I think if you've got somebody dedicated to this project, like, you can be successful. It just takes a bit of tenacity. So I think in summary, the SBIRs were really vital for funding what we wanted to build, and especially to getting demonstrations and prototypes out there. The non-dilutive funding is obviously great. Investors love to see this as well, because they know that, you know, for every dollar they put in, like 1.2, or for every dollar they put in, some amount of non-dilutive funding is going to come with it. And so it's a better deal for them. They give credibility, momentum, and they connect you with these TABAs that can offer a lot of expertise and support. They can connect you with customers and additional funding mechanisms. So, you know, I think the big takeaway, right, is that SBIR funding is not enough to launch a new company or technology, but it can be a really critical piece of the puzzle. So I will stop there. I don't know if I've gone too far over time or not. I've honestly lost a little bit of track of time. Yes, I've gone significantly over. That's not good. I'm sorry. If there's any time for questions, I'd love to answer some.
Yeah, I think we have some window for the questions. And thank you, Joshua, for your nice presentation. So first question from Love, how reliable and logical the technology readiness levels are and how this can be related to Sbir phase 1 and 2?
So is the question, what TRL level should you be at for phase 1 and 2?
Yeah.
So I'll kind of answer this really generically. It's usually spelled out pretty clearly in the RFA. So usually the application itself will say, you know, for this phase 1, you need to be at a 2 or a 3. It kind of depends, but obviously for phase 1, you don't necessarily need to be too far along.
Okay. So I don't see any questions in the chat box. Any other questions? Not only for Joshua or any other participants, or sorry, any other panelist. I have a question to Joshua. You said your latest technology can carry 100-pound maximum. Is it including the drone, its weight, self-weight, or excluding?
No, 100 pounds of useful payload. The aircraft itself weighs about 130 pounds.
Okay.
And then there's fuel that it also carries. But the 100 pounds is just the useful payload, not including fuel.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, really appreciate the opportunity to talk and happy to answer any other questions. And, you know, obviously we've really appreciated the support of USDA in all of this process.
Yeah. Another question to Steve. Steve, is the Sbir project proposal is open to all, or we need to start up a company first and then we are eligible to apply?
Again, you gotta look at the specific proposal, or the specific request for an application. But generally speaking, you need to be an established small business, which means 500 employees or less. But again, for any of those kind of proposal specific questions, you got to check with the actual agency that's issuing the request.
Okay, well, thank you all. I think we did quite well with time, a lot of good information there. At this time, I want to give the forum to all the panelists to see if they have any final comment to make. Yeah, please.
Or Steve, if you have a summary of this observation from this webinar, you can share.
Yeah, we can send our PowerPoint. Contact Melinda Kaufman for procedural questions and the NPLs for individual, about their individual programs.
Okay. Jim, Ken, any comments, final concluding remarks?
Jim Dooley, since you started by blaming me for instigating this, the instigation was that Lav and Momin and Victoria, Steve, we were all together back in February on a secret meeting. And, one of the outcomes of that was that how can we get more ag engineers? The whole idea of the 8.13 topic is engineering solutions to these critical problems as we're dealing with changes like Ken talked about, or wildfire, throughout agriculture in the broadest sense. There's tremendous need for innovation. And ASABE has been interested in reestablishing communities around entrepreneurship. Darren and others have supported that. And so could we do a webinar to introduce ASABE members that don't normally become aware of this? So I want to thank Lav and Momin for taking this and running with it, and the SBIR program managers for helping along the way. And between now and October 25th, hopefully there's a few of you who participated in this webinar who will see it. This is reducing your risk a little bit and encourage you to make the step. So thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you, Jim. Ken, any final comment?
No, just also to say this is a great idea, and I appreciate the opportunity to be part of it. It's the SBIR program has been around a long time and has really taken a lot of technologies to market. When I think about the projects that in some cases didn't actually produce what they are originally intended to produce, the product that was envisioned, I know in every case the company gained some insight or some capability that helped some other product that they were working on.
Thanks, Ken. Joshua, if you're there, I think you're logging off. But anyway, well, at this point, I just want to thank all the panelists. Their very useful information. Also, before I forget, Darren is there, and then John from ASABE. Thank you for hosting us. This is really, good start to some of the things. And if other members want to do something similar on several other topics, yeah, that'll be good. So yeah, thank you again for all of you for participating. I think ASABE will soon make this recording available somewhere on our website. So yeah, thank you all. Yeah, have a good one.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, all. Well done.
Bye.